The winter air bit through my cloak like fangs, carrying whispers of frozen pine and my own desperation. Ice crystals clung to my braids and I pushed through knee-deep snow, each labored step a battle I wasn't sure I'd win. The cabin emerged from the white like a corpse. Sagging roof, walls scarred and split by years of neglect. A structure that had given up long before I arrived. No fire, no life, just the ghost of what shelter used to mean, which was still more than the pack had left me with. My frozen fingers gripped the canvas bag that held everything I was now worth. It would have to be enough. Broken. Elder Moira's voice still echoed in my skull, cold and final as a winter grave. She'd stood before the gathered pack, her eyes raking over me like I was something diseased. An omega whose wolf won't wake is worse than no omega at all. The others had murmured their agreement. My own mother had turned her face away, unable to meet my ice-blue eyes, the only part of me that looked like hers. They hadn't driven me out with violence or ceremony. That would have required acknowledging I still existed. Instead, they'd erased me slowly. My portion at meals grew smaller, then vanished. My name disappeared from the work lists. Conversations died the moment I approached, leaving only uncomfortable silence and averted gazes. I'd become a shadow in my own home, present but unseen, breathing but already dead to them. So one frost-brittle morning, I'd gathered my few possessions and walked into the wilderness. And when I glanced back one final time, no one was watching. No one cared enough to stop me. Now I stood before this forgotten ruin, everything I'd salvaged fitting in a single worn bag. The cabin was falling apart, barely standing. Just like me. But it was unclaimed, unwanted by everyone else. I understood that perfectly, and if I could survive my pack's rejection, I could survive this. I had to. The gathering had taken place on the first snow of the season. I remembered because I thought it was beautiful, the way the flakes caught the firelight, turning the central clearing into something almost magical. I'd been naive enough to feel hopeful. 18 winters old. The age when an Omega's wolf should rise to the surface, complete and whole. I'd felt something that night, a stirring beneath my skin like distant thunder. But when Elder Moira had called me forward to demonstrate my shifts before the assembled pack, that thunder had died to nothing. I'd stood there in the circle of expectant faces, willing my body to change, begging it. My bones had ached with the effort, my vision blurring at the edges. For one desperate moment, I'd felt my jaw begin to stretch. Then nothing. Just me, gasping and shaking, still entirely human while the snow continued to fall around us like silent judgment. Defective, Moira had pronounced, and the word had landed like a stone in still water, ripples of shock and disgust spreading through the crowd. The wolf rejects her. Nature itself finds her unworthy. I'd searched the faces around me for someone, anyone who might argue, who might suggest we wait, that perhaps I needed more time. My mother had been standing near the elder's platform, her hand pressed to her mouth. Our eyes met for just a heartbeat. Then she looked away, deliberately, completely, as if I'd already ceased to exist. That was the moment I understood. Not the elder's declaration or the pack's horrified whispers. It was my mother's profile, turned away from me like I was a stranger, like I was something shameful she needed to distance herself from before the stain of my failure could touch her too. My father hadn't even attended. Later, I'd learned he'd taken a hunting party deep into the Northern Territories that morning, a convenient absence that let him avoid witnessing his daughter's humiliation. The gathering had dissolved after that, pack members dispersing into the winter night. I'd stood alone in the clearing long after everyone left, snow gathering on my shoulders, turning my pale braids white, waiting for someone to come back, to tell me it would be all right, that they'd made a mistake. No one came. The fire had eventually burned down to embers, and still I stood there, learning what it meant to be invisible while still breathing, learning that rejection didn't roar, it whispered, cold and patient, until you couldn't hear anything else. Now, staring at the ruined cabin, I could still feel the ghost of that snow on my skin, the memory of my mother's turned face. I dropped my bag in the frozen doorway and got to work. The roof came first. It had to. Another heavy snow would collapse what remained, and I'd be buried under splintered wood and broken promises. I scavenged fallen branches from the surrounding forest, my fingers going numb inside my worn gloves as I dragged them back through the drifts. Each piece of wood felt impossibly heavy. My muscles screamed protests I couldn't afford to listen to. When I'd been with the pack, I'd done light work, kitchen prep, herb gathering, mending, nothing that required real strength. Now I wedged myself onto the sagging roof beams, my legs dangling over empty air, and lashed branches across the gaps with strips torn from my spare shirt. The wind fought me for every knot I tied. My hands bled where the rough bark bit through the fabric of my gloves. "Just this section," I whispered to myself. "Just make it through this one section." It was the same thing I'd told myself every morning since leaving. Just survive today. Tomorrow could wait. The hearth was worse. Years of neglect had left it clogged with debris and the nests of long-gone creatures. I cleared it by hand, scraping away layers of filth until my arms ached and my lungs burned from the dust. My ice-blue eyes watered. My braids came loose, pale hair falling around my face in a tangled curtain. I'd read once that humans could survive 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, 3 hours without shelter in winter conditions. I'd already pushed past the shelter deadline. My body was keeping score, even if my mind tried to ignore it. When I finally coaxed a flame to life in the cleaned hearth, I sat back on my heels and watched it grow. The first curl of smoke rose through the patched roof. The first whisper of warmth touched my frozen face. Something cracked inside my chest, not breaking, but shifting, a weight I hadn't known I was carrying. I'd done this, not the pack, not some strong-backed wolf who could shift and hunt. Me, the defective Omega who couldn't even manage a transformation. My hands were blistered and bleeding. My body was a map of bruises and exhaustion, but the cabin had a roof. It had fire. It had a chance. Maybe I did too. The thought came quiet and uncertain, like the first shoots of spring pushing through frozen ground. I was too tired to trust it, too worn down to believe anything except the evidence burning in front of me. But the fire didn't lie. It burned because I'd made it burn. I pulled my cloak tighter and let the warmth sink into my bones. One small victory against the endless cold. 3 days of relative stability made me bold enough to venture beyond the clearing. The cabin had shelter and fire, but I needed food. More importantly, I needed the winter herbs that grew in the deeper parts of the forest. Yarrow for wounds, willow bark for pain, elderberry for the cough that had started rattling in my chest. The forest was different here than it had been near my old packlands. Older, wilder. The trees grew so thick that even at midday, the light came filtered and gray. My boots crunched through snow that no one else had disturbed, and I tried to take comfort in that. Alone meant safe. Alone meant no one to reject me. I was kneeling beside a cluster of frost-touched yarrow when the forest went silent. Not the peaceful quiet of snowfall. This was the breathless hush of prey animals freezing in place, every instinct screaming predator. My hand stilled on the herbs. My pulse thundered in my ears, so loud I was certain whatever was out there could hear it. Then I saw him. He moved through the trees like smoke given form. A wolf so massive he made the ancient pines look small. Dark fur rippled over a frame of pure muscle and power, each movement deliberate and predatory. But it was the markings that made my breath catch. Tribal-like patterns curved across his shoulders and flanks, dark against dark, as though someone had carved authority itself into his pelt. His eyes found me through the undergrowth. amber gold and glowing, even in the dim winter light. Intelligent, ancient, the eyes of something that had ruled for so long it had forgotten what it meant to bow. I knew what he was before my mind could form the thought. Alpha. Not just any alpha, the kind that made other wolves drop their gaze and bare their throats. The kind that owned entire territories, commanded absolute loyalty, held the power of life and death in those massive jaws. Terror locked my limbs in place. I couldn't run, couldn't even breathe properly. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to submit, to make myself small, to show I wasn't a threat. But I had no wolf to show submission with, no transformation to prove I understood the hierarchy. I was just a girl, frozen and fragile, with nothing but human fear. The great wolf's head tilted slightly, studying me with an intensity that felt like being dissected. One step closer, and I could see the way his fur caught what little light filtered through the canopy, could see the sheer size of him, easily twice as large as any wolf I'd ever seen. Then, as suddenly as he'd appeared, he turned, moved deeper into the forest, his dark form dissolving into shadow and snow. But I knew he'd seen me, marked me, remembered me, and somehow that felt more dangerous than if he'd simply killed me where I knelt. The roar shattered the night 2 days later. I bolted upright from my makeshift bed near the hearth, my heart slamming against my ribs. The sound came again, not quite wolf, not quite human, but something caught between the two. Pain given voice, rage wrapped in agony. It came from just beyond my clearing. I should have stayed inside, should have barred the door and pretended I'd heard nothing. Whatever battle was happening out there, it wasn't mine. I'd learned that lesson already. Getting involved with pack politics, with wolf matters, only led to suffering. But I was already pulling on my boots, already grabbing the canvas bag where I kept my salvaged healing supplies. My hands moved before my mind could catch up with how foolish this was. The scene that greeted me turned my blood to ice. 2 wolves circled in the moonlit snow. One, the massive, dark form I'd seen in the forest. The other, smaller, but feral, its movements jerky and wrong. Rogue. I recognized the signs even from a distance. Eyes too wild, foam flecking its muzzle, the complete absence of rational thought. The great wolf, the alpha king, moved with lethal precision despite the dark stains spreading across his shoulder and flank. Blood. Too much blood. It steamed in the frozen air. Then I saw the silver gleam on the rogue's claws. Silver-laced. The poison that could kill even the strongest wolf if it reached the bloodstream. The rogue lunged. The king caught it mid-leap, jaws closing around its throat with a sickening crunch. The smaller wolf went limp, and the king dropped it into the crimson snow. Then his legs buckled. He tried to rise, failed, tried again. His amber eyes found me standing at the clearing's edge, and something passed through them. Surprise, perhaps. Or resignation. I had a choice. I could go back inside, let nature take its course. An Alpha King's death wasn't my concern, and his pack would probably blame me for not saving him anyway. They'd see a defective Omega standing over their fallen leader and assume the worst. The smart choice was to hide. But I'd spent weeks rebuilding a cabin that should have been my grave. I'd learned to coax life from dead wood and frozen ground. I'd survived because I refused to give up, even when giving up would have been easier. And now this magnificent, terrifying creature was bleeding out in my clearing because something in me still believed that survival, any survival, mattered. I dropped to my knees beside him, my hands already reaching for the wounds on his shoulder. His eyes tracked me, glazed with pain but still aware, still dangerous. "Stay still," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Just stay still." His answering growl rumbled through the snow, but he didn't move. I got to work. Getting him inside nearly killed us both. He was too heavy for me to lift, even weakened. I had to loop my arms under his massive front legs and drag him backward through the snow, inch by agonizing inch. My muscles screamed, my feet slipped. Twice I fell and twice I forced myself back up because stopping meant watching him die in the cold. By the time I hauled him over the threshold, my vision was blurring with exhaustion, and my hands were numb despite my gloves. I kicked the door shut and leaned against it, gasping, while the great wolf lay sprawled across my cabin floor like a fallen monument. His breathing came shallow and rapid. The silver was spreading. I could see the dark veins crawling up from the wounds on his shoulder, reaching toward his heart like poison roots. Wolves healed through their magic, through the pack bond and the moon's influence and the ancient power that ran in their blood. But silver disrupted all of that. It turned their greatest strength into uselessness, which meant I had to treat him like he was human. I built up the fire until the cabin was almost too warm, then dragged my bag of supplies beside him. My hands shook as I cut away matted fur around the wounds, revealing the deep gouges beneath. Silver particles glinted in the torn flesh like cursed stars. This is going to hurt. Though I wasn't sure he could understand me anymore. His eyes had glazed over, his massive body shuddering with each breath. I started with the extraction. Using a strip of clean cloth and my smallest knife, I picked out every fragment of silver I could find. Each piece made his body jerk, made that dangerous growl rumble deeper. But he didn't snap at me, didn't lash out. Some part of him understood I was trying to help. Or he was too far gone to stop me. Once the silver was out, I packed the wounds with yarrow paste, the same herbs I'd been gathering when I first saw him. I wrapped his shoulder with strips torn from my only spare blanket, working by feel as much as sight. My fingers remembered the motions from treating minor injuries in the pack, though I'd never worked on anything this severe. Never had anyone's life balanced so completely in my incapable hands. When I finally finished, dawn was breaking beyond the cabin's patched roof. I sat back against the wall, too exhausted to move, and watched the rise and fall of his breathing. It was steadier now, slower. The dark veins had stopped spreading. He might live, or he might still die, but I'd done everything I knew how to do. The defective Omega who couldn't shift had just saved an Alpha King with nothing but human skill and stubborn refusal to quit. I closed my eyes and let that impossible truth settle over me like snow. I woke to the sound of breathing that wasn't my own. For a moment, I'd forgotten where I was, forgotten the massive wolf taking up half my cabin floor. Then my eyes focused on the bandages wrapped around his shoulder, the dark fur rising and falling with steady rhythm, and the previous night crashed back into memory. He was alive. The relief hit me so hard I had to press my hand against the wall to steady myself. I'd done it. Somehow, impossibly, I'd kept an Alpha King from dying. His eyes opened, not gradually, like someone waking from natural sleep. One moment closed, the next fully alert, those amber gold eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath catch. Even wounded, even lying on my cabin floor wrapped in my spare blanket, he radiated power. The air between us pulled tight. I should have looked away, should have shown the submission that every Omega instinct I possessed was screaming at me to display. But I'd saved his life, and that felt like it earned me the right to at least meet his gaze. His form rippled, blurred, and then where the wolf had been, a man lay sprawled across my floor. I'd seen transformations before, but never one so fluid, so complete. He was all sharp angles and lean muscle, tribal markings now visible as dark tattoos across his bare shoulder and chest. His black hair was longer than convention dictated for an alpha, falling past his jaw. And those eyes, they hadn't changed. Still amber, still burning with that unsettling intelligence. "You're alive," I managed, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. "So are you." His voice was rough, probably from the silver's effects, but it carried an edge of something I couldn't quite name. Not gratitude, something closer to confusion. How long have you been here, in Blackpine territory? 3 weeks, maybe 4. I pulled my cloak tighter, suddenly aware of how I must look. Tangled braids, clothes stained with his blood, dark circles under my eyes. I didn't know this was claimed land. I just needed shelter. He pushed himself up on one elbow, moving carefully but without the weakness I'd expected. Already healing now that the silver was gone. His gaze swept the cabin, taking in my patched roof, my meager supplies, the herbs drying by the hearth. Blackpine's northern reach is the deadliest stretch in 5 territories. Rogues, silver traps left by hunters, temperatures that drop low enough to kill in hours. His eyes came back to mine. And you've survived here alone for a month. It wasn't a question. It was something closer to disbelief. I had no choice, I said simply. Everyone has a choice. You chose to stay alive, chose to rebuild this ruin, chose to save me instead of hiding. His head tilted slightly, studying me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. What pack throws away an Omega capable of that? The question hit like a physical blow. One that only values the wolf, I whispered. His expression shifted, understanding, and something that looked almost like anger, but not directed at me. They came with the sunrise. I heard them before I saw them. The deliberate crunch of boots through snow, the low murmur of voices speaking in the clipped tones of soldiers. My hands froze on the bandage I was changing on Cade's shoulder. His eyes met mine, and I saw the warning there. The door slammed open without preamble. 3 wolves in human form filled my small cabin, all hard edges and barely contained violence. Their eyes swept the space, taking in their injured king, the blood-stained floor, and me kneeling beside him with my healing supplies. The largest one, a man with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, took a step toward me. Step away from the king. I didn't move. Couldn't. Terror had turned my legs to stone. Thane, Cade's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Stand down. My king, we tracked the rogue here, found you injured with an unknown Omega, who saved my life. Cade pushed himself to his feet, moving with the careful deliberation of someone still healing but refusing to show weakness. While you were hours behind, she extracted silver from my blood and kept me alive through the night. The scarred enforcer, Thane, looked between us, his expression skeptical. She's packless, no scent markers, no claim. His eyes raked over me with barely concealed disgust. What kind of Omega survives alone in Blackpine without protection? The kind who doesn't need it. Cade's words fell into the silence like stones into still water. He moved to stand beside me, his presence a shield I hadn't asked for but desperately needed. She's been here a month, built shelter, found food, gathered medicine, all without a wolf to hunt for her or pack magic to keep her warm. That's not possible, another enforcer said, younger than Thane but with the same hard suspicion. An Omega alone would be dead in a week. And yet, Cade gestured to the cabin around us, my patched roof, my organized supplies, the herbs hanging to dry. She's not just alive, she's thriving. While packs across the territories pride themselves on their strength through shifting, through dominance, through violence, this woman survived the deadliest stretch of northern territory with nothing but human resilience and refusal to quit. His amber eyes found mine, holding my gaze with something that felt like respect, like recognition. You want to know what real strength looks like? He turned back to his enforcers, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that made even Thane straighten. It looks like rebuilding when the world tells you you're broken. It looks like choosing to save a stranger's life when hiding would be safer. It looks like her. The cabin fell silent. Thane's expression shifted from suspicion to something closer to confusion. The younger enforcer was staring at me like he'd never seen an Omega before. Cade's hand came to rest briefly on my shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that felt like a declaration. "She's under my protection now," he said. "Anyone who questions that answers to me." No one questioned it. The enforcers left at dawn, disappearing into the forest like shadows. Cade stayed. He should have gone with them, should have returned to his pack, his territory, his responsibilities, but he remained in my cabin, healing and watching me work with that unsettling intensity that made me feel both exposed and somehow seen for the first time. By the third day, the storm that had been threatening finally broke, not with violence, but with a gradual clearing, clouds parting to reveal a sky so blue it hurt to look at, the kind of sky that promised new beginnings, if you were foolish enough to believe in such things. I was outside splitting firewood when he approached. His shoulder had healed completely, the tribal markings across his skin now unmarred by bandages or blood. He moved with that fluid grace that came naturally to alphas, every gesture purposeful and controlled. "Come with me to Blackpine." The words were so unexpected I nearly dropped the axe. I set it down carefully, buying myself time to process what he'd just said. "What?" "Your healer is skilled, but she's traditional, relies entirely on pack magic and moon rituals." He stepped closer, his amber eyes steady on mine. "What you did with human medicine, with knowledge and determination, I've never seen anything like it. My pack needs that, needs someone who can think beyond what we've always done." "I'm not," I started, then stopped. Not capable? I'd proven I was. Not worthy? He'd already declared otherwise in front of his enforcers. "Let them." His voice carried an edge of command that probably moved mountains when he wanted it to. "It looks like making it clear that healing isn't about the wolf. It's about the knowledge, the skill, the refusal to give up when others would." He paused. Something softer entered his expression. "You spent your whole life being told you're not enough because you're missing one thing. In Blackpine, you'll be valued for everything you are." The offer hung between us like a held breath. A role, a purpose, a place where I wouldn't have to hide or diminish myself or pretend my survival didn't matter. "I rebuilt this cabin," I said quietly, looking back at the structure that had become my sanctuary. "Made it mine." "You did, and it will always be here if you need it." Cade followed my gaze. "But a cabin isn't a life, Aerin. It's just shelter. You deserve more than just surviving." He knew my name. I'd told him during one of our conversations over the past few days, but hearing it now felt different, like he was speaking to the whole of me, not just the broken omega everyone else saw. "What if I fail?" The question escaped before I could stop it. "What if you don't?" He held out his hand, palm up, an offer, not a command. "Come home, Aerin. Let me show you what strength really looks like when it's celebrated instead of scorned." I looked at his hand, at the cabin behind me, at the endless forest that had tried so hard to kill me and failed. Then I reached out and took his hand. It was warm, steady, real. "Okay," I whispered. "I'll come." His smile was small but genuine, and it felt like the sun breaking through winter clouds. "Good," he said. "Let's go home." The journey to Blackpine took most of the day. Cade kept his pace measured, accommodating my human limitations without making me feel lesser for them. His enforcers had left supplies, proper winter gear, food that wasn't foraged or rationed, small kindnesses that felt monumental after weeks of scraping by on nothing. I looked back only once. The cabin stood in its clearing, smoke still rising from the chimney I'd rebuilt with bleeding hands. It looked almost peaceful now, no longer a ruin but a testament, proof that I'd survived what should have killed me. "It'll be here," Cade said quietly, reading my hesitation. "Whenever you need it." I nodded and turned away. Forward, always forward. The forest changed as we traveled deeper into Blackpine territory. The trees grew less wild, paths more deliberate. I could feel the presence of pack, not threatening but there, watchful, waiting to see what their king had brought home. We crested a ridge as the sun began its descent, and suddenly Blackpine sprawled before us, not a primitive gathering of dens, but a real settlement, Buildings with smoke rising from stone chimneys, paths cleared and maintained, wolves in both forms moving with purpose and community. Life, thriving, organized life. It was beautiful, terrifying, more than I'd let myself imagine. "The pack gathers at dusk," Kate said, standing beside me on the ridge. "They'll want to meet you, to hear your howl." He paused, glancing at me. "Unless you'd prefer to wait." My howl, the thing I'd failed to produce that night in front of Elder Moira, the proof of belonging I'd never been able to give. "I can't shift," I reminded him, old fear creeping into my voice. "I don't have a wolf's howl." "No," he agreed, "you don't." The words should have stung. Instead, they felt honest, real. "But you have a voice, and a song doesn't need to be perfect to matter. It just needs to be true." Below us, wolves were gathering in the central clearing. I could see them tilting their heads up, scenting the wind, waiting for their king's signal, waiting to know who I was. Cade threw his head back and howled, a sound so pure and powerful it seemed to shake the trees, a declaration, a welcome, an invitation. The pack answered, dozens of voices rising in a chorus that made my chest ache with longing. This was what I'd been denied, this belonging, this music. I'd never be able to match their wolf song. My voice would be rougher, human, imperfect. But Cade was right. It didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be mine. I drew in a breath that tasted of pine and snow and possibility. Then I let it out. Not a howl exactly, but something close, raw and unpolished and utterly genuine. The sound of someone who'd survived when survival seemed impossible, who'd rebuilt herself from ruins. The song of the unbroken. The pack's howls shifted, adjusting to accommodate my strange voice, weaving it into their chorus instead of drowning it out, making space for something different, making space for me. Cade's hand found mine, warm and steady. "Welcome home, Aerin," he said, and for the first time in my life, I believed it. I was home.